Oh man, a school trip, nice! This feels like the perfect DLC for a game centered around the school. I wonder what the culture of the region we'll visit will be like. That seems a little... Oh. Oh, that's xenophobia in my Pokemon game. Okay, shut up, Masker. Anyway, hi, I'm Dream. Before we continue talking about Paldea, we must take a small detour to talk about a different place entirely. Though Kitakami is far away from Paldea, the stories of both of these regions are nonetheless connected. A traveler from a foreign region brought Terra crystals to the land of Kitakami, which led to the spread of the terrestrial phenomenon in this region. While the Teal Mask DLC and complementary material explain practically everything you need to know about the stories of this eastern land, there are a couple of mysteries worth looking at to fill the gaps, and I believe there are some interesting details scattered throughout Kitakami that makes it a really interesting place to analyze. The first thing to note is that Kitakami is itself not a region. It is a land, and even the Japanese versions of Scarlet and Violet refer to it by Sato instead of Chiho. Where is this countryside exactly though? For obvious reasons, we know it is located among the Japan set of Pokemon regions. In fact, Kitakami is a real-life location in the Tohoku region of Japan, so it's very likely that this place is literally inspired by it. This would place the region around here, this location between Kanto and the Sinnoh region. This actually makes a lot of sense. Why? Well, across Kitakami we see a strong Hisuian influence in many aspects. The most obvious of these influences is Ursaluna, who migrated to the timeless woods of Kitakami after drifting ashore. This implies that Sinnoh and Hisui are within swimming distance of Kitakami, which would make the theory that Kitakami corresponds to the Tohoku region gain a lot of strength. We can also find white-striped basculin in these woods, which PLA refer to as a regional form of basculin that inhabits Hisui. The most interesting detail to me though is the Hisuian Growlithe statues found on the stairs up to Kitakami Hall and the use of the Hisuian alphabet across this DLC. There are a few types of scripts when it comes to Pokemon, and I want to shout out Pokemon A for their insane dedication to keeping up with the many different alphabets of this franchise. Paldea, Unova, and Kalos use what we call the Poke-Latin alphabet, which roughly looks like this. Hisui and Sinnoh use this alphabet instead, which is the same one we see scattered throughout Kitakami across the Teal Mask DLC. We also know this alphabet doesn't seem to be universal in the Japan regions, as they use this type of script instead in the Let's Go games for Kanto. So Hisui and Kitakami have similar cultures, the same alphabet, and we see cases of Pokemon migration from Hisui to Kitakami. The two places are definitely connected, and I believe I know exactly what this connection is. If you remember Legends Arceus, there is a lot of information about the old people of Hisui who left the region and were replaced by foreigners from other regions that wanted to basically colonize the land. I believe that some of the old people of Hisui might have ended up settling in what would eventually become Kitakami, carrying part of their tradition and their alphabet along with them. The Hisuian Snow Special takes us through a story that takes place in Hisui, with Alec as our protagonist. Alec is someone from Hisui that lives somewhere else, and sometimes visits the region, and I think this special is the last piece of the puzzle we need to connect Kitakami and Hisui. After all, what object does Alec have in his youth to protect himself from a wild Zorua? That's right, a mask. Alec's father is a craftsman who sometimes makes masks, and there seems to be this belief in Hisuian people that masks will protect them from wild Pokemon. We know the Mask Festival in Kitakami existed even before the Tale of the Loyal Three. We can see that in flashbacks. In fact, the masks they wear here are much more buried than the ones they use in modern times. This always confused me, as the Festival of Masks is supposed to be a celebration for the Loyal Three, but now it makes sense. Hisuian people moved from their land to Kitakami, settled it, and brought their mask-making traditions with them. That is the origin of Kitakami. Of course, peace wouldn't last forever. Eventually, a man and an ogre from a foreign land appeared in Kitakami, carrying crystals with them. The game goes on to explain how, because the man and the ogre look so different from them, they weren't allowed to get closer to the village. Instead, they were forced to move to the mountain that would come to be known as Oni Mountain in the future. There's been a lot of speculation about the identity of the man, especially because the game describes him as being different from the people of Kitakami. One of those stories is that the man could be AZ, but I personally don't believe that to be the case. AZ's most defining characteristic is his height, and not only does the tale not mention the traveler being any taller than the people, but the flashbacks we get also don't seem to draw any attention to that. In fact, the man looks pretty normal in the flashback. The only thing they need to do to blend in with the people of Kitakami is put on a mask, which wouldn't work if the reason the man looks so different was his height. Also, the man dies at the end of the tale, and AZ is kind of alive at present, present? I think the truth is much simpler than that. We know they were carrying Terra crystals with them. After all, that's what we see in the crystal pool, and it's also the material their masks would be crafted with. Because of that, we can quickly assume two things about them. The man was from Paldea, and they must have explored the Great Crater, as the appearance of crystals across the region is much more recent. Why did he look so different then? The answer is he probably didn't. There's this very interesting article from 2023 called Oni and Outsiders in Japanese Cultural History by Kimiya Itakura, studying the works of Koyama Satoko, a professor of literature at Nishogakusha University. I'll link it in the description because I highly recommend giving it a read if you're interested in Japanese culture beyond simple references. In the article, she explores the image of Oni across various illustrations and fairy tales from Japan, and the influence that the figure of the Oni has had in culture. I think the following paragraph from Kimiya Itakura's essay perfectly illustrates what I believe to be the answer to our literal mystery. The aristocrat Fujiwara no Kanezane wrote in his diary in 1172 about creatures resembling Oni arriving by boat in Izu. Inability to communicate led to fighting and considerable injuries among the islanders before the interlopers left. Kanezane himself was of the opinion that the Oni were actually a group of foreigners. The way the Japanese saw foreign people with a different language and appearance as Oni shows how much they feared them. Oni have been historically linked to marginalized groups, foreigners, or enemies in wartime. In fact, the Momotaro Umi no Shinpei film, the first Japanese animated film from 1945, depicted Oni as Westerners with horns. I believe the teal mask simply picked up this idea, the idea of foreigners being described as monsters or outcasts. That's why when someone from Paldea visited Kitakami with a never-before-seen Pokémon, they were described as Oni. This actually makes even more sense in the context of Kitakami being made up of people who migrated from Hisui, as they experience the loss of their homeland to colonization, and fear of Pokémon is a pretty prevalent theme across Legends Arceus. So, who was this man then? I believe it to be someone who participated in the Area Zero expedition, maybe even Heath himself. Remember how the last video ended? Heath had lost a lot of credibility after publishing the Scarlet Book and the Violet Book, because of all the strange aspects about its retelling of the Area Zero expedition. I briefly touched upon the fact that the Academy funded the entire expedition with the hope that it could aid in the institution's research work and foster future generations of scholars and scientists. The problem is, it didn't. The opposite happened, and people quickly returned the books. The only copy we can find in the present is the one in the Academy, and the most unbelievable part of the book is damaged. I believe what happened is clear. The Academy wanted to make people forget the book. They wanted people to forget how much money they had wasted on this apparent failure, and once they managed to do that, Heath might have fled Paldea. Why stay in a place where he was seen as a fraud? The next detail is a bit more of a stretch, but I find it not worthy and I like what it brings to the theory. In Legends Arceus, we can see a stack of books that Kogita has, and among them there is a purple book that is literally only used as an asset here, and I think it could be the Violet Book. Considering that the Terra Leak confirms that Legends Arceus takes place 150 years ago, and we know that Heath's expedition happened 200 years ago, this actually gives us a pretty convincing time frame. After the failure of the book, Heath could have traveled the world in search of a place where he would be accepted, maybe finding Ogerpon along the way, and eventually he reached the land of Kitakami. With himself, he carried crystals and a copy of his own book. It may have been a failure, but it was far too important for him to simply throw it away. When he died, that book may have been collected by someone else, and it got passed around until it reached the hands of Kogita. I like this theory because it helps us both confirm the identity of the man, and it also uses this weird strange detail from Kogita's room. Going back to the backstory revealed in the DLC, we saw how the man in Ogerpon got rejected by the people of Kitakami. It is possible here was the moment the stories of an ogre started spawning, specifically the one in Paradise Barrens. If you see a shadowy figure approaching you outside the village at twilight, be wary. Don a mask at once and hide your face. Do so, and whether the shadow is man or monster, you will pass each other as fellow mask wearers. So forth and so forth. The man in this story is Heath, and the ogre is Ogerpon. These stories spread among the people of Kitakami really fast, who were probably afraid, but the mask makers sympathized with them and made them masks out of the crystals they carried with them. This allowed them to join in the festivals of Kitakami, and the beauty of their masks made them really popular among the people. They were doomed to hide their oniness in public to be accepted, but at least they could live. That is, of course, until stories of their masks spread too far. An old couple from a different land heard about the masks and asked their Pokemon to steal it. This Pokemon was Petulant, who recruited Okidogi, Mugidori, and Pheasantipiti on its journey towards Kitakami by granting them their wishes through its binding mochi. It's just like me. It would commit war crimes for attention. Wait, what? So, where were they from? Probably Hisui too, actually. In the video The Untold Story of Petrond, we see them cross the land in Lapras, and more importantly, Basculegion to reach Kitakami. The only Japanese regions surrounded entirely by sea are Hoenn and Sinnoh, previously Hisui, and Basculegion used to inhabit Hisui. The rest of the legend is pretty straightforward, actually. They reached Kitakami, they stole the masks, beat Ogerpon's trainer to death, and then Ogerpon beat them to death. This didn't help the public opinion people had towards Ogerpon though, as people mistakenly believed that the Loyal Three had sacrificed themselves to protect the masks. The other signposts we see around Kitakami were probably created here, just like the Graven Loyalty Plaza, in honor of the three heroes of Kitakami. There is one more interesting detail about this legend though. The man did manage to protect one of the masks, which leads me to believe he didn't immediately die. It's possible he got poisoned during the encounter against the Loyal Three, which eventually led to his death, but we know he must have left the cave at some point since Ogerpon didn't find his body anywhere. Ogerpon just saw that his friend was missing. My belief is that the man just didn't want Ogerpon to see him die. Maybe the reason he left the cave was an attempt at getting help, but he didn't have a mask with him anymore. He left the teal mask in the cave for Ogerpon, and he knew how much the locals would refuse to even look him in the eye if he showed up without concealing himself for once. There's one thing I've always wondered. Why are there crystals in the crystal pool? Someone must have placed them there after all. The game doesn't mention it, but someone had to put them in the water of the crystal pool for the spread of those crystals to actually begin. What if it happened here? Picture this. Heath climbs up the mountain, up to the crystal pool, holding the crystals that have caused people so much pain. The Paldean Empire sought them and abused its people to drive countless expeditions. The Area Zero expedition failed because of what those same crystals showed him, and now people in Pokemon were willing to kill just to get their hands on some gems? No, this was madness. The search for treasure was driving people mad. At the end of his climb, Heath finds himself in front of the pool, and the poison finally knocks him out. He falls forward, sinking into the lake with the crystals he had carried all the way from Paldea. But Terapagos and Terrestrial Energy would hear his plea. Why is there a ghost Terra type Milotic holding a crystal cluster at the crystal pool? It attacks you as soon as you approach the pond, as if it had come back to life just to protect it, to find a trainer that is truly worthy of taking them, if they even exist. I have no doubt in my mind that this is a result of Terrestrial Energy acknowledging Heath's anger, his grief, his loss, of being rejected, of being a victim to the selfish interests of the Academy, of having to leave his friend behind. It lives at the bottom of clear lakes. In times of war, it shows itself, which soothes people's minds and hearts. Milotic will protect these crystals for you. Milotic will find a trainer who is worthy of being Ogerpon's friend. You can rest in peace, Heath. Unfortunately, the truth of the tale of Ogerpon and the Loyal Three died that day. The Mask Maker tried to protect them, but he was silenced by the people of Kitakami and outcast for trying to bring up the truth. The Oni were evil and were meant to be defeated. That's everything the people of Kitakami needed to know. Even today, the people of Kitakami are prejudiced against foreigners, and Kitakami began to revolve around being a tourist trap for profit of their culture instead of thinking about whether the ogre deserved to be outcast or not. It is frankly sad. In the future, the Loyal Three will come back to life because of the crystals from the crystal pool, but this time, we'll be there to stop them. We'll be there to expose the truth. I think there is no better way to end this than with another paragraph from Kimiya Itakura's article. It is fine to enjoy Oni as interesting characters, but we should not forget their negative history. Perhaps the Teal Mask does exactly that. That is why it reverses the tale of Momotaro. Pokemon has always been a franchise about accepting others and forming connections, and what better way to do that than to tear down the concept of an Oni? Carmine learned her lesson and became friends with Ogerpon. Maybe we should do the same and abandon prejudice. After all, in what we call ogres, we might find a friend. That will be all for today. I hope you look forward to the end of this series. Until then, keep dreaming.